A lot of talk about the roster. Give me your kind of idea about the roster without Colin Murray Boyles, which I think, speaking of clicking your heels together and wishing upon a star, uh, without Colin coming back, just start with that, and then we're going to go from there.
Yeah, so when you kind of look at what South Carolina was able to do in the transfer portal, you can tell when you look at stats and how these guys played, they got back to looking for the players that fit Lamont Paris' system. And when last year when they went into their portal, they got more athletic without a doubt, but that didn't lead to success because some of those guys maybe weren't the best fits for what Lamont Paris wanted to do. But I think some of the questions that everybody's going to want to talk about are point guard. Point guard. Like I think Michi Johnson can be able to run that point, and you saw it a little bit his first year, and I think it maybe tried a little bit too hard sometimes in his first year. And then that second year, whenever he did play point, I think having a guy like Talon Cooper kind of focused him, and I think when he played point or that last year, he did overall and really just continue to become more unselfish player. And you saw that in a few plays in that season. And, when you look at it, and obviously we're talking without Colin Murray Boyles right now, but if you find a way to get Colin Murray Boyles back, that takes this team to a whole nother level. But, again, you kind of look at it, you see some of the reasons why South Carolina went after some of these guys for Lamont Paris' system. One thing that you see too is like, last year, this team struggled with turnovers. That was the major thing. When you look at these guys' stats, Sherrod Johns, K-Pick from San Diego, like these guys don't turn the ball over statistically. And I think that was just kind of a huge point of emphasis for this roster is to get back to not turning the ball over and be able to get into Lamont Paris' offense.
I'm going to see if you'd agree with me on because we're still in without Colin Murray Boyles land for right now. See if you'd agree with me on this starting five. And I'm also not in Cam Scott's going to make a major jump land either. Because that's a land we could all be living in.
Mm-hmm.
Cam Scott, the things that made him a highly regarded recruit are still present. Some guys, basketball, it's a little more rare than in football where a lot of good players do need some time. But they just wasn't ready. Couldn't play defense, but athletically and skill set wise, he's fine. I mean, I think there's some things there, and we didn't see it a whole lot, but he didn't get a lot of playing time. So, we'll see if he can get. I think confidence is a big deal with him. So I'm not in Cam Scott's going to start land yet either. But so this starting lineup, all right, I'm gonna roll this out at you. Michi Johnson, Eli Ellis, Mongolian Mike, Christ Asandiko, and Norden Capek.
Yeah, I think that's where I'd go with it. Obviously, with Kreese being at the 5 and Norden, I think being at the 4, being that stretch 4 type of guy. But maybe, Matt and I were actually talking about this last night, going through a potential starting 5. Like maybe, he had Kevin Knox in there in that 2 spot, but I think Ellis could fit into that 2 spot. Now, the big thing with the Ellis is like, obviously you see the highlights, you see all the points, but the big thing for any freshman really coming into college basketball's defense. Like he's got to be able to continue getting better at defense and be able to play at the level Lamont Paris needs him to play at defensively. But because there's no doubt about his scoring and seeing how that translates. But I mean, I think the 2 spots you'd really feel pretty good about there would be the 3 and 4 with, because I really like Mike Sherrod Johnson. That guy, when you look at him, he's 6'9" guy that can pass the ball with the best of them too. Like he's got great passing ability, and I think he's a little bit better shooter than his stats say. I think he was like a 30% guy this past year, but I think he's a little bit better shooter than that. But I think you feel really good about that 3 and 4, and then that 5 spot. If Jordan Butler maybe takes a big jump, which they need him to do this all season, like maybe he could be that starting 5, because he's another guy that he kind of exactly what Lamont Paris wants in that 5 spot, a guy that can stretch the floor and be a shooter. But I'm intrigued by Kreese as well. Like I think he showed some stuff his first year at St. Joseph's, and I would like to learn more just what happened in this past year at Providence. But they were kind of just all over the place this past season there, and so I think it's intriguing. But obviously you still got that one roster spot that is obviously being held for Murray Bulls, and see where he goes from there.
Yeah, well, the Asandiko, he intrigues me as well, because I actually went back beyond Providence and did look at St. Joe's. 8.2 points, 5.7 boards a game as a freshman at St. Joe's, was a 36% three-point shooter. And kind of like when last 2 years ago, I watched, Talon Cooper, 9 points a game at Minnesota. but a bunch of assists. And, I was told, well, watch him pass the basketball. Watch him pass. And, obviously Asandiko's not a point guard. He's a big man, and that's different. But you also, when you watch Asandiko's tape, he can pass the back. I mean, he's a good passer. And you mentioned Mongolian Mike. I'm going to call him Mongolian Mike because I can't. Sharv Jams, I guess is how you say it.
Sharov jumps.
Yeah, I think so.
Sharov jumps.
Sharov jumps.
Okay. Sharov jumps.
Sharov jumps.
Mike Sharov jumps.
Yeah.
I can say that pretty easily.
Yeah,
Mongolian Mike.
It just looks weird, but Mongolian Mike's good. It just rolls off the tongue.
It does. It's awesome. I mean, he's also like a big, tall passer. Tall people, when they can pass, that's pretty good. You can see, you don't have, I mean, in basketball, you get hands in the face. You got to put a hand in their face and put your hands up. They tell you on defense to do that. Well, you can see over it and pass over it. But Asandiko, to me, had the skill. Like you could, when I watched him, and I'm not great at it, but I kind of I understood where they were coming from when they took him. And conditioning's an issue, as we've been told. I mean, only like 24 minutes a game, 19 minutes a game. He's got to get in better shape, but he's good inside. Like, unlike Jordan Butler, who has a good outside shot, but was a weak post player last year. Phil loves that style of game, the weak post.
Oh yeah.
Phil's the type that's going to go hard in the paint. Alex, are you a hard in the paint guy?
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
It's the era in basketball I grew up playing.
Jordan Butler needs to refine that part of his game. But if you could, I mean, look, it's pretty obvious what Jordan needs to do. Live in the weight room, go try to rebound, just work on rebounding and just go to like.
Dude, my man needs to sit in front of a jugs machine.
Or needs to go
balls like thrown at him, right?
Dude,
and like catch.
Go to a park in the inner city and play some daggone pickup ball. Go to the Broad River Correctional Institute and play some basketball or something. Get tough is what I'm saying. That's a metaphor. Please, I'm joking. If you don't learn anything, I'm joking. Jacob says the Pope is from Chicago.
Yeah, Cardinal Prevost, I think is what his name is.
They went with the dude from Chicago,
an American Pope.
I don't know what to say.
I don't know.
That's big news for me, Alex. I was like,
X is going to be wild with conspiracy theories.
Oh my Lord!
Oh God! Could you imagine?
Anyway, all right. Well, after you get off, we'll get back on that, Alex.
Yeah.
But I think there's some things to work with there in the post. I like Norton Capek. I understand why they took Elijah Strong. I don't think they took Elijah Strong to necessarily be a starter, though they're higher on him than most. Especially defensively, but you're kind of working with like three guys on the inside there. There's a lot of ifs, but there's some. But I guess my point is, wouldn't you agree that they have a chance? They have a chance. Is that fair, or am I just? Or they don't have a chance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fair. And to go back to Jordan Butler real quick, like I think it was you start to see a little bit later in the season he was starting to play more aggressive, and I think it was the Arkansas or Texas game that he really started to just attack the basket and use his 7-foot frame to get into the paint and make plays. And if he can do that, that's the next step, because obviously we know what the shot is. But if he can do that, that's going to open up his perimeter shot even more, because it'll be forcing teams to respect him down low. But and to Norton too, like when you watch his highlights, I think you see a little bit of BJ Mack there. Like he's a guy that's a pick and pop type of guy. Like you saw some highlights of him picking and a guy throwing back to the top of the key and draining a three, and that was a lot of what BJ Mack did, as well as what he was able to do in the paint. And I think Norton can do some things in the paint as well. So again, it kind of goes back to, I think they just went back to looking at that team 2 years ago and say, okay, what do we do this year, and get back to what fits Lamont Paris and that coaching staff system. And you see that with a lot of these guys.
Yeah, I see that too. I like that too. And then, all right, so in the Nana Sports chat box, Ben says Knox over Eli early on. Craig says Knox. You say Knox. I'm not disagreeing with that. My question for you is, so we've watched a lot of highlights of Eli Ellis, and they're all offense, most of them. Do you know? I mean, do we know anything about how he plays defense? That's tough to tell with overtime elite, to be honest. I don't know how much defense they're actually playing. Maybe they are. It just doesn't seem like it. But tell me a little bit about that. Oh my God, Phil.
I couldn't help myself. It was the first thing that popped into my head.
Cabrini Green to the Sistine. Keeping your head above water. James.
It's
the saddest episode of Good Times ever when James died.
It really is.
I hated that. Damn, Florida. Oh my God. Don't make me cry.
I know, man. Yes.
I've got all the emotions. Somebody on X said ketchup on hot dogs is now no ketchup on hot dogs is now palpable law. Goodness gracious. I'm sorry, Alex. You know it's a lot of fun when you come on with us.
Yeah.
You know,
that was my
the
fault.
smorgasbord has featured a lot of different items today.
We touch on all different type of topics.
It's a smorgasbord for a reason.
We rolled it all out today.
But so do we know anything about Ellis's defense? I know that Knox, Kobe Knox to me is a low bust guy. I mean, because of his brother, because of kind of what he's been through, his journey. Kind of kept his head in the game at South Florida. That was a tough situation. Their coach died in the offseason. Died. Yeah, that's tough. Had 15-9 in the conference tournament. I thought saved his best for last. So I've heard his defense is good, but do we know anything about Ellis's and on all that good stuff?
I think that's something with any freshman you wonder about is defensively. I mean, you kind of saw it this year with Cam Scott. Like, I think in high school, there's just not too much defense, especially the way, they played in college. And like with Eli Ellis, like I think they do play a little bit of defense in the OTE, especially with the guys they're going up against. Like, you're going up against guys that are signed with Kansas. And I mean, it's an elite league. It's a really good league. And I think, with him, is going to be that how quickly can he transition to being what they need him to be defensively. Because again, we know what he can do offensively, and that's what makes me think a little bit. Kind of agree with the chat that Kobe Knox could be the guy that starts at that 2 spot just because of what he can do defensively. And he's not. He's a 33% 3-point shooter as well, and I think he's another guy that could take another step and be that guy that lands that 2 spot. But I wouldn't be surprised. I think it's all going to depend on like how quickly can he pick up defensively for Eli if he wants to get in that start position. But would not be a bit surprised if Knox is starting at the 2 to start the year.
Yeah, I don't think you guys are wrong. I was just kind of spitballing. I think with Eli, what you would have if you have him and Michi in the backcourt is 2 ball handlers. In football, they say if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have any. I don't know that in basketball, if you have 2 point guards, you don't have any, especially if the other one can play the 2. What you want to do, given what happened last year, in my opinion, is get the daggum ball up the court.
Yeah.
I mean, don't you think? Or
even inbound it.
Get it up the court and then run your offense. Because sometimes they would get it up the court. Nobody's running the offense. They're just driving coast to coast, man.
I mean, and we talked about earlier the turnovers being an issue last year. Another issue was like there'd be times where there'd be open shots on the perimeter, they weren't hitting them. I mean, they had so many chances you could see when they did get into the offense, when they were able to get the ball up the court, they weren't able to knock shots down. And you see, when you look at stats, you think that's going to be a little bit better this year. But a guy like Eli Ellis, if he's at that too, if Michi drives, and that's one thing Michi for sure has. Like, obviously, we know he can do scoring, but I mean, his first step off the ball is quick, and he can get past defenders and draw defenders. And like, if you got a guy like Eli Ellis, who's a known shooter on the outside, he can knock shots down. Shrove Johnson, K-Pick, like you need shooters on the perimeter. I think they've gotten a little bit better there in the offseason, and Eli Ellis and both Michi can play huge parts on that.
Yeah, I think Russell in the Nana Sports chat box goes, don't turn it over 25 times. Yeah.
That too. Yeah.
Dude, they turned it over how many times at Vanderbilt and lost in the last minutes because of a turnover?
Yeah, I mean, that was the issue. That was one of the main issues last year is turnovers. Like, the shooting as well. But I mean, think about that Florida game. They had that game. I mean, they had the national champions beat on their home court, but Florida started pressing. They couldn't get the ball up the court. I think if Jamari Thomas even plays in that game because he was injured, I think they still win that game because Jamari could, for the most part, get the ball up the court. But overall, they just struggled to keep control of the ball.
Yeah, I don't know, because Carolina played very structured in that game against Florida and not allow them to build the lead. And I just think when Jamari was in, it was feast or famine. I mean, you can't have a point guard take 13 shots and miss 10 of them.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me, but the shooters, though, you make a good point. Just about everybody they brought in can shoot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah, I think Sharab jumps when you look from a guys who are going to be shooting a three. Like I think Sharab jumps is the guy. He's at 30%. But again, when you watch his film, his highlights and stuff, he looks like a better shooter than 33% shooter. And I think his previous, I don't have his stats up right now, but at his previous stops, he was better than that 30%. So that's something that's going to be key. They've got to be able to knock shots down and not turn the ball over. Like that's key for any team, but especially in this system where they like kind of bleed the clock and get it late into the shot clock. You got to be able to do those things.
Yeah, it'd be interesting with a fully healthy, motivated Miles Studi too. I think is going to have an impact on this team a little greater than what people are thinking with all the new names flying around.
Yeah, Miles, if there's been games where he's been in Fuego,
Clemson,
the Virginia Tech and Charlotte 2 years ago.
Yeah.
That's kind of thing that's intriguing about even Michi Johnson being bad. Like we saw Michi Johnson 2 years ago can win games by himself. Miles Studi can win games by himself if he's on. Now the key is just for those guys this year, and especially it's going to be this year. They got to be consistent, more consistent. Like you want to have those games where you're hitting 6 threes or whatever, but just be more consistent. From really both those guys, but really all of them, they just got to be some consistency, and that's going to help them if they can do it. JC and Mad Dog.